Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome, magical ones, to the show. I am so glad you're here. I've been seeing more and more recently how secret witches who don't know their power and magic are really struggling to see their own possibility, which is why I've created the path for them to really step into cultivating, kindling their own possibility, their own belief. And the only requirement for that is hope. That is the gateway here at Team Secret Witch. We are currently full for all our one-to-one and group crucibles until later this year, but I am inviting you to join our Secret Witch Circle Facebook group, especially for our Manifesting with the Moon live ritual. This is a free offering around new moon for you to begin connecting with the moon, deepening into intimacy with your sisters, and learning how to set intentions that will powerfully help you to change your life and create more magic. And as very on trend with today's topic in our show, learning to liberate your need for approval in a safe alchemical space where all of you is welcome. Find out more by searching Secret Witch Circle on Facebook and joining us there. It is a space full of love. On the Secret Witch Show today, I am speaking to one of the biggest fears of the Secret Witch: how to express your witch in a modern world that doesn't approve. I explore why magical women often struggle with the witchery and fear of being outcast from the world, and why they often avoid being their medicine because of that, as well as how going into the wild and learning to love yourself deeper can liberate your shadow fear of approval. In this episode, I explore what's possible when you begin to embody your witch queen for yourself before beginning to express her into the world, why there's no quick fix for the witch, and why women need the remedy of the feminine to liberate the old stories that they have around being a good girl or even rebelling against being approved of, so that you can live as your full expression of the witch. Let's dive in. Welcome, magical ones, to the solo episode as voted by you in our Secret Witch Circle group on Facebook: how to express your witch in a modern world that doesn't approve. This is a juicy topic, so I'm excited to dive into this one. This topic really speaks to the heart of the secret witch, because the secret witch who doesn't know her power and magic really struggles often with expressing her witchy fullness, especially in today's modern world. There's this kind of idea of this modern world being chaotic, crazy, loud, linear, difficult, burdening. So the witch, in her kind of feminine beauty, in her fullness, in her mystery, in her magic, in her power, is not welcome, is the sense of the secret witch. And often, again, rightly so, in terms of how we have historically treated witches. So I'm going to come to that in a minute, but just to speak to some of the kind of witchy aspects when you think about who the witch is, why this kind of makes sense. This kind of deep fear of approval is often in the witch. This deep fear of expressing our witchy aspects. So the kind of typical witchy aspects that are seen in this kind of modern world are often seen as kind of negative things. So you've got kind of that beautiful feminine mystery. At the moment, I'm leading a group of women through our feminine mystery crucible, and doing that kind of powerful reclamation of that mysterious feminine. And that, to a masculine world, can be seen as lazy, as weird, as not welcome, this feminine power. So it can feel quite edgy to claim. And again, that kind of magical essence of the witch, often seen as not real, not believed, or often also seen as taboo. You think about the story of the witch, maybe in the Wizard of Oz or something like that. The witch just really isn't welcome. She's seen as this kind of taboo figure. And then there's the medicine woman. A medicine woman is this deep healer, this kind of wise woman, and she's kind of seen as weird or a bit woo-woo, a bit loopy. Again, you can see why women, particularly my women, who are these magical women, these magical medicine women often as well, can really fear expressing their witch in a modern world that just doesn't value that. And of course, the other aspect is that creatrix, that kind of real powerful creatrix of the witch. And she, again, is not welcome often in this modern world, or at least seen as not being welcome. Now, our world tends to not want to reclaim power. There's a kind of, they might feel like they want to reclaim power and say that they want to reclaim power, but there's this kind of there's this resistance to really deeply owning our capacity to create. Because to own our capacity to create, we have to also own all the ways that we create what we don't want. So the modern world, doesn't really want to do that deep, powerful reclamation work, and yet the witch does. So, the witch can often be seen as this kind of weird figure, this kind of, she brings up a lot of resistance in others often. So it makes perfect sense that my women, and this topic was specifically requested by one woman and then voted for by all of you in the group, so it's obviously something that the witch can really, really fear, or feel the fear of, that kind of that lack of approval for you being yourself. So it's really, really important that we speak to this. And so the first thing to just look at is why this is. So obviously there is this kind of deeper witch wound. I talk about this a lot, particularly in the Secret Witch Circle group. There's this kind of deep witch wound in the witch that kind of is really in our bodies. We really feel it in our cells. This idea that really, if our ancestors had been kind of in their full magic and power, they would have been burned at the stake. They would have literally been burned for being magical medicine women, for being creatrixes, for being in their feminine mystery, in a world that just didn't value that, in a world that didn't approve. So it makes perfect sense that as witches, as women who identify as like magical, powerful beings, or the possibility for being a magical, powerful being, it makes perfect sense that there would be this deep fear that was kind of felt within our bodies about reclaiming our power, about expressing our witch, when we would have likely in generations gone past been burned for that, been killed for that. So there is a lot of tending required here in order for us to be that. So I'm just having a little drink. The first thing to say here is that you're so held. And if this is you, if you're a witch who's resonating with these elements, with these aspects, that feminine mystery, the magic, the medicine woman, the creatrix, or at least being even called into that, feeling that resonance with them, but maybe that fear because of this witch wound, then know that you have this deep connection to magic, to the earth, to love, to truth. This is who you are here to be. This is your essence. So if you're here listening to that, if you're kind of resonating with this idea of like not being approved of in this modern world because you're a witch, you're a magical one, then this is really, firstly, a sign to begin to lean into deeply trusting your soul, deeply trusting yourself, beginning to commune with the wild, beginning to commune with spirits, with your ancestors. Just something I'm seeing more and more is so important. And this is really so that you can begin to cultivate a deeper trust in all of that, beginning to trust you, yourself, your truth, beginning to trust your power, beginning to trust your magic, so that you can then choose into expressing that. This is my first invitation, is to really cultivate your own relationship with your wild witch. Your inner wild, your local outer wild will all be helpful in that. So really communing with the wild. And the more you do this, the more you cultivate that relationship with your own inner witch yourself, and kind of, being out in the wild in order to do that, the more that you will welcome the wild parts of your witch that you want to express, that you long to express, but have some fear about doing that, the more you'll begin to trust that that part of you is welcome. So my invitation, firstly, before we go anywhere else, is to, if this is you and you're resonating with that kind of deep fear of approval, not being approved of by being a witch, is to get out of the modern world, because that's only kind of being there is likely frying your nervous system. It's likely keeping you in fear. So get out of that modern hectic world and into the place where it is welcome, and that may well look like solitude in the wild, but it's also a deeply loving and courageous act. So being out in the wild, first and foremost, is you communing with your very essence as a witch. And it's likely where you'll begin to feel most in your power, most yourself, most topped up, most full. And this is really important, because if we're feeling, first and foremost, that expressing our witch in a modern world that doesn't approve is like really edgy for us, we've got to top ourselves up and become ourselves before expressing her into the world to others. We need a full nervous system, we need love before we even begin to express ourselves into the world as others. And this is the work here in this path. So of course, just being here listening to the podcast is going to be kind of one of those first steps that will help you to see where you need to go deeper. And so being in the wild is something that will instantly, especially as a witch, calm your nervous system. So when kind of living in our crazy modern world, likely as a witch will feel like it's quite frying if you're not interacting with it consciously. So this is your permission. I am Alchemilla, Queen Witch of ancient medicinal truth, and I provide you a prescription to go into the wild as your medicine. And as you do, you will instantly begin to embody a sense of peace, a sense of calm, joy, a sense of magic and possibility, a sense of love and truth. You'll begin to embody, ultimately, your witch. So the more you can fully embody her yourself, the less and less fear you will have about beginning to express her. So because your witch is powerful and magical, she truly, in her true full expression, kind of expresses herself with love and is able to expand past her shadow fear of approval. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but the deep invitation here is to fully embody your witch, because the more you do, the less you will feel impacted by that lack of approval from the modern world, the less you'll feel impacted by the modern world. And so this is your invitation. If you're here as a witch in this modern world, you need to consciously step out of the modern world and step into the magical world. So nature, harnessing that magical energy rather than the mundane. So stepping out into the wild to rewild yourself as often as possible, to allow yourself to be held by the earth. This is something that is kind of crucial for a witch, even if that's lying there for 15 minutes a day, held by the earth. This is one of the most powerful steps that you can take as a witch in a modern world who's feeling that lack of approval, who's feeling that disconnect. And so yeah, it might feel edgy, but I'm going to guide you more into that in a moment. But yeah, it's almost like as witches, we've kind of been taken from our wild habitat. It's like we were all caged animals. We're kind of unplugged from that source energy, from our life force. And if we are kind of feeling stuck in that fear of the modern world that doesn't approve, we're not allowing ourselves to return, to reconnect to where we've come from. And we need to remember that our home, as humans in general, is in the wild, not just witches, although witches will feel that cagedness more because of who they're here to be. You know, there are some people who aren't witches, who aren't magical ones, who can operate in the modern world without being impacted, but specifically witches are kind of very sensitive. So the witch really came here to manifest magic in her body, and so the invitation is always to be in your body. This is a big part of our path here at Team Secret Witch, is to get women back into their bodies, to get magical ones back into their bodies. So if you are fearing, if you've got this fear of expressing your witch, if you've got this fear of not having approval, my first invitation is to create extra ways to connect with your body, to soothe your nervous system. So I love baths, and even when I was living a life where my witch wasn't expressed outwardly, I would express her desires and her needs through bathing rituals, either in privacy, in ways that felt at my edge, or by being in the wild. So take those small steps that feel maybe edgy to you, but not pushing yourself over the edge. And from there, as you begin to kind of feel more in your body, more kind of calm in your nervous system, do the deep shadow work. And of course, the shadow work's often largely required before you can even take those small steps, so that is important too. But yeah, there's that real sense of, like, it just came really strongly through as I was thinking about this episode. I was like, what is that one thing that I need my women to know? And it is that just being out in the wild, that is going to be so powerful for you. So if you don't go out into the wild at the moment, and magically I've just realized I just shared in my group in the Secret Witch circle about going out into the wild, that post by the quote by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, the one about go out into the wild, go out, if you don't, then nothing will ever happen, kind of thing. So it's quite magical as well. And yeah, it's so true. And often one of the reasons that my women don't go into the wild is this kind of approval shadow. So I'm actually also reading Existential Kink at the moment by her name's just gone, Carolyn Elliott, I think it is. And I'm loving the similarities with the path here at Team Secret Witch around the shadow work. Yeah, there's so much kind of crossover, and there's absolute importance of going into shadow work with love. So again, we're going to go into talking about that as well in a moment. But one of the three main shadows, and by shadows we mean like the fears that stop the witch from being her full self, like our shadows are all the ways that we get pulled back by the darkness out of being our full expression, or the places that we don't love that are in our shadow. And one of the three main shadows of the Secret Witch is approval. So it's really, again, really pertinent. This episode is really quite critical to this path, particularly the shadow work element of the path. So again, often the best question to ask when somebody is feeling that kind of lack of being able to express their witch in a modern world that doesn't approve is, what is that deeper fear? And approval usually is the shadow fear that is stopping a woman from fully expressing herself. And really, it's all kind of a deep fear of being fully in our power in case we're rejected from mainstream society. And that is usually one of the deepest Secret Witch fears that keeps her hiding as a Secret Witch instead of being her witch queen, and instead of being that kind of full expression of her her magic. And I looked up approval, the meaning of it, just before I began to record this as well, and it spoke to me because it said approval is the belief that someone or something is good or acceptable. And wow, when I think about that as a definition, it's like, well, who decides what's good or acceptable? And yeah, often this kind of idea that she's not going to be loved if she is herself keeps the secret witch in this kind of idea that she needs to be good or acceptable. And this often leaves her in one of the shadow archetypes of the secret witch, which I call good girl. And yeah, good girl is very much about people pleasing, putting others first, giving up her own hopes and dreams, kind of selling her soul in order to fulfill other people's needs, that avoiding being herself, masking herself. She kind of learns how to behave in order to keep herself loved and approved of, and typically that ends up in her burning out because she's just kind of been on autopilot, automatically, unconsciously, innocently just doing what everybody else wants rather than fulfilling her own needs, her own dreams, the sense of kind of not feeling worthy. So bless her. That is often how a secret witch shows up at my door. The other way that they can show up, because often, again, when we're in shadow, we can kind of swing from one end of the pole to the other extreme of the pole. And there's kind of always two expressions of a shadow. So when my women have kind of got fed up of being good girls, they'll often then swing to the opposite end and become rebels. So instead of living just cleanly from her truthful expression of soul, my women will often show up in either one of those two camps. So she'll either be in good girl or she'll show up in rebel. And rebel is that kind of sod you, I'm not going to be who you want me to be anymore, and I don't care if you approve. So that can be another expression of my witch, my women, in this kind of modern world, or also complete rejection of the modern world in its entirety, is another expression of the rebel. So she might just completely, dissociate, cut herself off from this crazy modern world, from the masculine, and kind of end up kind of avoiding being in the modern world as well, avoiding approval, avoiding the modern world by being this kind of armored rebel. So that's another way that my women often show up. And again, it's innocently created often from childhood, often from our old stories. And again, I'm going to go into that a little bit more in a moment, but it's interesting because often the women who come to my work, who come to my podcast, come to it from a place of burnout. And there's this kind of often highly sensitiveness about a witch. And often that's what brings them here. So they've kind of come to the point where they just know that they can't operate like this anymore in this modern world. It's like they're just being burned out. And often as well, my women can be neurodivergent. So I've recently discovered this myself, that I'm autistic, and I haven't had it fully diagnosed, but it completely makes sense to me. It explains so much of my childhood, so much of my adult struggles, so much of my wounding. That I was this deeply, deeply sensitive child. I would have kind of emotional meltdowns over kind of living in a world that just was so full of stimulus, I guess. That kind of deep sensitivity, my sensitivity to noise, my sensitivity to smells, my sensitivity to all sorts of things. My tendency to mask myself and act how others want in order to fit in. This is something that is quite typical with women who are neurodivergent. It's just being talked a lot about at the moment, actually, about how, as they call them, the lost girls. Lucy Pierce spoke to this in one of the previous episodes of the show. But there's this kind of tendency in women particularly to have masked over their neurodivergence, to try and act in a way that would have them fit in. And often the brilliant women that I work with have really brilliant minds. They're kind of neurodivergent brains. And they have come to learn to kind of shun that and push it to the side because it's not welcome in this modern world. So they'll have often spent a lot of time trying to hide that, trying to mask their sensitivity, trying to, mask their brilliant minds and pretend to be like everyone else, instead of seeing that their sensitivity can actually be a huge gift. And this is because it's not a gift that the masculine kind of modern world particularly values. Our culture kind of lives in this logical, linear, fast-paced, very kind of penetrative way. And I think the thing to really witness here, to really realise, before we kind of swing into victim to the masculine, is to begin to see that whilst we are, feminine, and we're not kind of seen that isn't valued by the masculine world, is to see that we're also not victim to that. We're not here to be against the masculine. We're here to just fully express our feminine souls. And whilst we can feel we're victims to it, especially often as secret witches, it's important we recognise that we're the ones who've been innocently creating this idea that we need approval. And again, we've done that to keep ourselves safe, because staying in that story of needing approval has had us kind of stay safe. We've not had to expand. We've not had to, step into the fear of being ourselves, which is particularly difficult as a sensitive witch. And that is why this path exists, because this is all wanting some love, so that you probably, if you're listening, you've probably got some sort of sense that there's something more for you to be creating, that you're here for something more. And so that needs some love, so that you can learn to navigate that deep sensitivity and alchemize it into a gift. And again, we're going to talk a bit more about that in this episode, so I'll come to that later. But another thing that I just wanted to speak to was that our maidens, so we're just leading Feminine Mystery, just about to actually, as I'm recording this, and been speaking a lot about the kind of feminine life cycle, and often this approval story gets created when we're in our maidens. So that's kind of the very young childhood that we kind of learn, pick up some story that we are victims, that we are that we have to be approved of, that we learn to, as little girls, that we need to stay safe, and in order to do that we must be approved of. So it's something that we've learned and then not consciously chosen out of. And often what happens in the witch is that she will get stuck in that maiden phase. She won't kind of consciously initiate into adulthood. She won't realise that there's this kind of time in life where we can initiate ourselves into adulthood and begin to make different choices to that which we have been shown as we were growing up. And this is so important to begin to see. It certainly was the truth for me that I didn't see that. It was something that I just kind of learned to stay in that maiden and didn't feel safe to initiate myself into the feminine life cycle until I got initiated into a soul descent during my birth, when I was giving birth to Lily. And at that point I began to see that I was being initiated into the mother archetype and initiated into soul. So I had this descent. And that is available for everyone to learn to consciously initiate yourself into adulthood, where we realise that we make the choices. We don't need to be victims to seeking approval any longer, and instead we can create our lives in alignment with our beautiful deep gifts of sensitivity, if only we learn to love the parts of us that think that we are unlovable because of them. So really, ultimately, it is always ourselves that feels unlovable, and this keeps ourselves in the idea that we're not going to be approved of. And again, just go there with so much love, because this is something that we've picked up unconsciously. It's not something that's ever been modelled to us, that it's safe. Our ancestors, our parents, they've all experienced this same fear about kind of being the full expression in a world that doesn't approve. It's likely that story travels back through a few generations, and yeah, my story was very much this. The thought that I needed approval kept me in jobs, relationships, dynamics that I just weren't in alignment. So I deeply desired to travel. I decided to go. I didn't go to uni. I stayed in a life where I very much wasn't aligned with that life, but I was married and my husband wanted to stay in the same town that he'd always grown up in. And it kept me kind of, that story of thinking that I needed approval really had me deny my own truth and deny my witchness, keep myself small, even right back to school. And again, I think this was my initial kind of place where I created this story. I think was when my dad left when I was 4, and I somehow created a story around that wounding, created a wounding around that said that I wasn't enough. And so from there, it trickled right the way through to what I created at school. I created at school the idea that I wasn't enough, that I wouldn't fit in, that I wasn't approved of. And so at one point in my life, I remember being told by a psychologist that I was mute. And it really speaks to, I think, the amount that I just didn't allow myself to express. If I was completely silent, then it just shows you how scared I was to express myself in this modern world as a witch, even as a small child, when I wasn't conscious of being a sensitive one, a magical one. And so, yeah, in case I was rejected, I just didn't express myself and hid all the parts of myself that felt like a burden. So my ex-husband's family were very masculine, very loud, very linear. And I remember they said I was weird. My ex-mother-in-law said to me once, just before we got married, I'm not going to lie, Nicole, I've never loved you, I've never liked you, but I'm going to try. And at the time, I was so in my approval shadow that I gave her a hug and said, oh, thank you for trying to like me. And I look back now and I think, bless me, like which part of me was so scared of losing her approval that even when she said she didn't like me, I gave her a hug and was like, thank you for trying. Like, that is deep approval shadow. And yeah, just remembering back to that was so traumatic for me. I remember the trauma of that. It actually had me kind of bounced out of my body, and I was kind of watching this scenario playing out, completely out of my body, just watching over what was happening. And it's kind of these traumas that have us disconnect from our body, which is why I say it's so important right at the start to really connect back, come back to our bodies as witches. Especially when we're in kind of trauma, to our sensitivity, to our sensitive sides. And I remember also, as part of that story, when I got divorced, my ex-husband sent me a video of myself talking about something. I remember what I was talking about, so it must have been quite a trauma again for me to be called weird. And I was talking about on a video live, so I was teaching an ascension path at the time. I was talking about the phrase curiosity and how they say curiosity killed the cat. And he sent it to me and said, you're so weird. Why do you have to speak like this? And for a while, that had me really shut down, doubt myself, and hate the kind of sensitive, brilliant parts of myself that were kind of actually saying something quite interesting, that, curiosity actually didn't kill the cat, which also was very kind of meta, really, because paradoxically that phrase was saying curiosity did kill the cat in essence, and I was saying no, it doesn't. And it was kind of like, actually that was almost the argument. Like, I was curious, I wanted to explore my own life, I didn't want to just be stuck in this box that I'd created for myself where curiosity wasn't welcome. So as I think back, it was quite an interesting one, actually. But yeah, for a while it had me stop sharing and stop expressing my insights on things that actually were quite interesting, quite helpful. And yeah, I've obviously reclaimed that since, talking about being a witch in public, which actually, yeah, is not that edgy to me at all anymore. But at one point it would have been. And yeah, I think, again, just going back to Clarissa Pinkola Estes' Go Out, go out into the woods or life will never happen, I see now that I was kind of not going out into the woods and giving away my power and trusting him because that was easier. So I kind of kept myself in the same four walls until eventually it became too much. And again, I just want to really clearly state that was not his fault. That was me creating innocently this story that kept me in a position where I felt I had to stay safe. I felt I had to stay approved of. That creation of my own had me not feel able to trust myself, had me not want to speak truth. It had me not be able to express myself and take up space. It had me create illness. I got chronic fatigue instead, so that I didn't have to put myself out there and be my full expression of leadership and brilliance. And that's still a wound that I work with now. I'm always expanding into this. But it's very much been created from that old story that I learned around when my dad left. Like creating that story that I wasn't lovable, I wasn't enough. And therefore, I must do everything I can to seek approval. And quite magically, I also had a shamanic healing this weekend all around being... which was all around not being enough, actually. And this was something that emerged as an intention for the healing. And quite magically, my ancestors brought a load of trauma forward for healing around this wounding of not being enough. And so this was something that they had always struggled with historically as my ancestors. I guess they're witches, right? So they've got this story of not being enough. And they kind of brought all of this to be burned in the fire, and said also that you can wait for others to rescue you, or you can choose a new story, a new way of being, where we recognize that this seeking approval is from shadow. And so powerful to realize that, because again, it gives us that capacity to begin to love ourselves enough to choose into a new way of being. And as I reflect now, my life is so radically different to how it used to be. And that was actually what my post was about going into the woods, the Clarissa Pinkola Estes quote, was, about how different my life is now. My house is quiet. It's set up for my sensitivities to noise, smells. I don't have anything that's not a natural product. I don't have noises blaring everywhere. Sometimes I go back to my parents' house and really had the conversation with them recently about, given the kind of diagnosis in my own mind of neurodivergence and autism, I'm really seeing that there's a deep need for a lack of noise, not a lack of too many noises on at once, and this kind of not having strong scents that are unnatural. My whole life is being set up in a way that is very much meeting my own needs, meeting my witchy needs, you could say. For example, also my desire to be vegan and gluten-free. Again, my partner is loving, he's respectful of my magic, he sees me, he loves me for me, he provides me for my vegan and gluten-free needs. And overall, if someone questions me on my choices, which is much, much rarer these days, I remember I used to get this happen quite a lot, that people would question me. I've really come to love myself enough to explore with love and express my truth. So that is available to everyone. And what I would say is that it has been an energetic choosing of it that way. It's really becoming unavailable for needing approval. But firstly, in order to do that, you have to begin to come to learn to love the parts of yourself that desire this approval. And when I was recording this episode, there were so many questions. So I just wanted to speak to some of the questions from the Secret Witch Circle sisters, because there's some really juicy stuff in there that's going to be really helpful for everyone. So the first question was, I feel the modern world can be so overwhelming. All the people, the noise, concrete, cars, the information overload. How do you handle that without having to live like a hermit? I loved this question. And Yeah, there's so much in this. There's again, just that coming back to what we've talked about, that being in a natural habitat, being out in the wild. And the benefit of that really is that, first and foremost, again, your nervous system will be less on edge when you're in the wild, when you're in a natural habitat. So the more time that you can spend in the wild, the calmer your nervous system will be. If you're not in the wild, if you're just living in the crazy modern world with all the people, the noise, the concrete, the cars, the information overload, then your nervous system is going to be revved up to the max. So if you are there, then the invitation to go into the wild is even deeper to you. And then the second thing, in response to that, because I'm trying to make this advice rather than just that kind of, I've talked about the energetic choosing of it that way, but I think that can feel a little bit like, well, I don't really know what that works. So I'm trying to keep it as practical as possible as well. So the other piece of work that I would invite you into, if that is you and the modern world feels overwhelming, is to begin to distill, like I was just talking to, what are your true needs? And as we do that, again, there can be kind of shadow needs that creep in. Like, for example, the need for approval. So it's not that you might feel like your need is to be approved of. That would be a shadow need. So shadow needs tend to be approval, control, or security. So the deeper, beyond that, what are the deeper needs that you have around dealing with people, noise, concrete, and cars, and information overload? And I think I'd spend some time in that inquiry to really feel what could be a practical way of helping you to navigate as a witch who's sensitive in this modern world. What do you need? And it may be that the wild, that more trips into the wild, into nature, is something that is an actual deep need of yours, that is a true need that wants to be honoured. And then the other part of that is just to speak to what is the fear that has you think that you can't make them. Can't meet those needs, because again, there's that kind of sense of approval that can creep in about meeting our needs. When we talk about meeting our needs, it's like, oh yeah, but I can see I've got needs, but often for the secret witch, that's quite edgy to be able to meet them. So yeah, what is the deeper fear around the approval, and can you love that deeper fear and then choose into it anyway, kind of meeting your needs as needed. So yeah, and also just to finish off on that one, it will get easier as you begin to rise into your witch queen. So as you kind of deepen into this path, as you deepen into your witch queen, your nervous system will be less on edge from feeling that you have to guard yourself from everyone. So yeah, it does get easier the more and more you can listen to your body, honour your body, and tend your nervous system. It will get a lot easier to live in that world. So this is like a real whistle-stop tour of living in the crazy modern world that's so overwhelming. But yeah, I hope that's helpful. It feels like it's going to be helpful for so many women. So I'm so grateful for these questions to address as well. So the next question was, how or when do you tell people about your witchy side? I'm really scared of how people who I know and who know me in a certain way would react, especially when using the word witch. This is a great question, because again, that kind of, that using of the word witch can be triggering for people, because of that kind of, that darkness, that idea of darkness. So again, I just invite you first to get really clean and really clear on who you are before you open yourself to this. So there's that, again, that coming back to the tending of the nervous system. What's the deeper fear about using the word witch? What's the deeper fear about how people will react? What's the deeper fear hidden in the approval? And especially around how people know you in a certain way. I deeply remember actually this sense of, especially when I was at school, kind of growing and expanding, that sense of like, and being young as well, just in general, that sense of like, well, people know me as this, therefore I have to stick to this mask. So I really hear what you're saying there, but there's it feels like there's something deeply interesting around that kind of sense of you not being able to change, that kind of people know you in a certain way. What's the fear there about kind of breaking out of that mold? And also, what's the resistance to the word witch, if I haven't said that already? It's quite an interesting one. It's almost, again, the witch often has this darkness that is really resisted by my women, especially those who've come from an ascension path, which is all kind of love and light and, that kind of idea of like, let's just look towards the joy. The witch contains a real darkness, a real comfort with death. And again, often that is something that other people will resist, but it's also something that we will resist in ourselves. So what is the resistance to that darkness being seen by others? There may be some kind of perfection shadow, which is a big part of the secret witch as well, that's kind of coming into that, almost the sense of having to be seen in a way that is perfect. So again, the deeper invitation here is to begin to love that part of you and welcome that part of you. Again, like talking to the witch and darkness a little bit more, kind of culturally, society doesn't like the darkness. They avoid it. They tend to plaster over it. I was talking about this with a one-to-one client, actually, who is discovering that part of her gift is to really, welcome all of the spectrum of emotions, all of the darkness, rather than plaster over it, which has been the typical pattern of the secret witch, is that kind of plastering over of the darkness, especially in British culture. Here in England, there's kind of this unwillingness to go into their emotions. And yet the powerful thing about this is when a witch walks in and models that it's safe to go into the darkness, this is deep, I've got goosebumps, deep medicine for the world. Absolute medicine. If you kind of fear modeling your witchiness to someone, it's likely a huge part of your gift to help be that medicine, to activate the parts of others that reject themselves and their own darkness. And this is likely why it scares people, because they need it. They're suppressed, they're plastered over their emotions, and that's keeping people ill. People suppressing their emotions is going to have them be ill. This is why witches get chronic fatigue, because they're kind of not allowing their emotions to be fully expressed. And so this kind of capacity of the witch to be okay with darkness, to love themselves in their own darkness, they're modeling that. You being okay with the word witch, you kind of loving that part of yourself, will be deeply activating medicine for others who need it. And again, this is true of homeopathy. Homeopathy activates people hugely because, again, it's that medicine that they need. So you being that medicine of being the witch is deeply serving, if uncomfortable for everyone. But it is helpful to remember that being in your witchy fullness is deeply serving. And if I'd not alchemized and chosen into the fear of speaking my truth when my ex-husband told me I was weird, I wouldn't be here now sharing this medicine with you. So it is deeply important. This is medicine for everyone. So it can be helpful to hold it like that. It can be helpful to go into deeper inquiry about your own resistance to being that darkness. And I suspect that would be really powerful. Another question was how to handle close relationships when they think you're weird, especially at home in my supposedly safe place. I've just realised that this again speaks to so beautifully the experience I had with my ex-husband. And often our closest relationships can be the tricky ones because there's such a vulnerability there. And when I was dealing with this, I was very much in that kind of rebel phase of the secret witch. So I didn't handle it in the most conscious way I could have done now. And yet, again, that's perfect because that's where I was at the time. So what I would just speak to now is that I've come to see that vulnerability and love are the best places to create from. So I would invite you here to meet your edge here. Firstly, kind of illuminating what the fear is that's coming up. And can you see the fear as a reflection of the part of you that wants love? And then also what would feel loving to you in order to be able to liberate yourself from this? And also just coming back to like which parts of the other people that may think you're weird also want love. this our feminine power is created very much from love. So the more that we can love ourselves, the more that we can love others, and creating all of this from love is going to be the way. So yeah, just really lovingly notice the parts of you that feel weird, the parts of you that's the parts of your whoever it is that you're in a relationship with thinking you're weird. What is their fear, and can you share vulnerably and speak to that, and love them there, and love yourself there, and notice when all of this fear is showing up. Another question was how to go out and perform rituals in nature with the fear of being seen and having to explain myself. And the question, the part of this question that I found interesting and again really insightful to speak to for everyone here, so all of these questions are so beautifully welcome, is the word having. And actually when you shared this question, you did put the word having in inverted commas, so there's a power in that kind of, I can see you witnessing that isn't necessarily true, which is really powerful to just again witness here for everybody to see that is a fear that isn't necessarily true. So my question to you in that is, what is the younger part of you that feels she has to explain herself? When did you learn this old story that you have to explain yourself? And again, that's quite a big one to illuminate, but it definitely wants some love in this question. And again, think back to a time where you may have created this story in childhood. What's the story around having to, as if there's only one way and you have to conform to it? Because that feels to be the place that wants love there. Again, there's just to speak to the going out, the actual action of going out and performing rituals. Again, there's no kind of easy fix for this. Again, in the modern world, we are used to having these kind of masculine, easy, simple fixes. It's like, well, here's my problem, here's the simple answer. And again, the modern world will very much lean into that. But as a witch who's come here to kind of harness her feminine power, it's really learning to be okay with that being not a simple process. So the deeper invitation here is to deal with it as you would any kind of shadow. Is really, the answer is love. The amount of love that you can bring to the resistant part of you that really is scared to go and perform rituals in nature. And again, you may choose to go out into the wild, somewhere that is away from your family. If that was something that was particularly edgy for you, it may be something that you just go and sit at a tree. I remember actually the other morning sitting at my tree, and a woman came over and obviously thought that I was upset, and she just said, "Are you okay?" Which I thought was beautiful, because there was that sense of, oh, she thinks I'm a little bit weird, but she also is so loving with it. And I think that's just to see that is a possibility, that people might just be concerned about you, and you can just let them know, no, I'm okay. This is, seeing this as your choice, that this is something that you've chosen into, and loving yourself there. But I think the interesting question there is, what is the fear? What's the deep fear there for you? That will be quite an illuminating one. So if you're also feeling that about performing rituals in nature, again, that's a useful inquiry. The other thing that occurs to me is to just meet your edge. Again, like there's this kind of tendency to think that we have to like push beyond that edge, and really where we want to be is like a 7 out of 10 edge. So choose something that is feeling edgy but not like pushing you over the edge of the cliff. So hopefully that will help you in beginning to liberate that, and I'd suggest as well and recommend maybe doing it as a regular ritual, so that you can begin to just get familiar with that part of you and allow your witch to express. The more that your witch is able to express, the more easy it will become, because she'll remember her kind of habitat, her natural habitat, and that power will be activated. So yeah, I'm enjoying. I will enjoy hearing what you created from that. Another question is, how can we have the conversation with those who aren't open to it and feel comfortable in doing so ourselves? And this is a juicy one. I loved this one when I read this one, because in it I'm kind of hearing that sense of almost wanting to convince others to be open to our witchiness. And this is actually really illuminating, because there can be a sense in the secret witch of well, okay, I'll be my truth so long as others are open to approving of me. And again, I speak to this because I've been here myself too. So I'm just seeing this more clearly with your question, actually. Almost like an openness to being the expression of your witch, but also a longing for people to change and approve of you in that expression. And I very much feel like that's something that I've done. It's almost like a level up from completely avoiding it. It's almost like the next stage, the next secret witch stage, is to be okay with expressing it so long as they love you there, which is really, really interesting to illuminate. And I suspect it's because we've kind of learned conditional love. It's almost a case of being so openly and unconditionally loving to ourselves about who we are that we then don't need to convince others to be open to it. And so that will take some love to be able to just, really begin to love yourself in your witchiness enough to have people not approve, and still be yourself. So I'd love to hear what comes up for you there. But it's that sense of kind of modeling to others unconditional love. If we can model that to others, that kind of unconditional love for ourselves, and kind of just allowing ourselves to love ourselves even if others don't approve, is one of the most powerful things that we can do. But we can also love them in their non-approval, rather than coming up as a victim to their approval or rebelling against their non-approval. It's about really just loving others in their fearful non-approval, because ultimately it's coming back to that point about others not approving is really triggering something in them that makes them not able to approve. It's almost like highlighting for them their own material for liberation. So what is going on for them in their non-approval, and just loving them there. The more that we can model that kind of unconditional love for them, ironically, it's not the reason to do it, but the more that we can love them in their non-approval, the more likely they are to approve of you becoming your witch, because this is something different. I know certainly that was the case for me in my own journey, was as I kind of loved everybody else in that disapproval, it was almost like a modeling for them of how we can be unconditionally loving, which ironically was the very medicine that had them approve of my descent into the witch. So I hope that makes sense. But beautiful question. So thank you to everyone who asked a question. If you do want to ask questions and vote on the topic, another invitation just to join us in that Secret Witch Circle group on Facebook, which is where we vote every month for the solo topic that I'm going to speak to. But just to round up, ultimately there's kind of no magic bullet. We spoke to this a little bit in that Q&A, but it'd be nice to have a magic bullet, but that's still, as I said, coming from this desire to be in the world of a culture that just wants a quick masculine fix to a problem. So ultimately, like the remedy is to liberate our fear of not being approved of by the modern world by healing ourselves through the remedy of the feminine. So ironically, the kind of remedy of not having a quick fix, the remedy of love, the remedy of loving ourselves where we are, ironically is the kind of very medicine that is disapproved of, that remedy of the feminine. And ultimately it's all really the same process as liberating all of our shadow. And the very first step of that is love. So if we're being triggered by the idea of being in a full witchy expression, that's a sign that this needs some love. It's a sign that you need to learn to give the love to yourself that you thought came from outside, that you thought was coming from that approval. Approval and love aren't the same thing. Love is a true need. Love is that kind of, we talked about true needs and shadowy needs. Love is a true need. Love is it's not even a need. Love is just truth. That is what is available. That's who you are. And then there's kind of approval, which is that shadowy idea, that shadowy version of love. We can often feel as secret witches that if we're approved of, we're loved. And that is very conditional, as we talked about, that kind of conditional love. So the deeper invitation here is to learn to unconditionally love yourself rather than looking outside of yourself for approval. by fitting into today's society. One, the kind of allowing yourself unconditional love allows you to be the full expression of your soul, whereas the other one keeps you selling your soul in order to gain that approval in a society that it doesn't feel welcome in. So yeah, what would help you to begin to love that part of yourself that doesn't feel welcome in today's society? And what are the deep fears that are arising for you in expressing your witch? Again, we talked about there's usually 3: control, security, or approval, but there's usually also something underneath them. What is it that is that deeper fear? And again, just something I wanted to speak to, actually, that I meant to speak to earlier, was that kind of owning our power to not seek approval. Where does that kind of need to be approved of come from? And when I was talking about how we can often feel victim to it, there's something that I really love to share with my clients. I call it the victim triangle, but Stephen Cartman talks of it as the drama triangle. And again, the victim, the drama, the secret witch loves to create drama and distraction. So often when she's in her approval shadow, she will be in one of the 3 parts of the triangle. So either victim, rescuer, or persecutor. This is a great model to really identify where you are in shadow. And often, good girl, we talked about the difference between good girl and rebel, but good girl is often either in victim, kind of like everything's happening to me, or she's in rescuer, like I need to be approved of. I can't be open, I can't be myself, I can't perform rituals, I can't be in my witchy darkness, I can't be in my witchy fullness. All of these things are either victim or rescuer. That kind of sense of I can't often is that victim, whereas rescuer is like I need to save someone else, and therefore I'm not going to be approved of if I don't do this. Kind of rescuing the others from that lack of approval. So good girl is either in victim or rescuer, and rebel then tends to swing into persecutor, like sod you, I'm just going to be my full witch and you should learn to love me as I am. That's very persecuting, like you should do this, like that you should kind of idea is usually a sign of persecutor. And often what will happen when we're triggered into approval shadow is we will end up on this drama triangle. And the deep invitation is to begin to learn how to break that cycle. And usually the way to break that kind of triangle is to relate differently by choosing love. So whenever you're on that triangle, just noticing that you're on the triangle is enough to begin to break that. That's going quite deep. There's maybe I should do a whole episode on that, but there's quite a lot there, but it's still just worth witnessing. Like, where are you being on the drama triangle? Just to kind of bring it back to a place to end, which magically is almost on the hour. There is a way to create this from your feminine power. This is all about you being in your power from love. So recognize that the people not approving in this modern world are likely being triggered by your witchy medicine of truth. And just knowing that, beginning to see that means that they're in fear if they are triggered. If they're triggered, then they're in fear, and likely you're also triggered by their fear. So the more that you can love yourself in your fear, which is always our work first, the more available you will be to love them in their fear too, which is just as innocent as ours. So I think the final thing to just drop back into before we close is to remember what we said right at the beginning, and that is that you are so held by Mama Earth. If you are a witch, you have a deep connection directly to the source energy, directly to the life force. Mama Earth will top you up. So if you're seeking approval, it is a deep sign, first and foremost, to lean into deeply trusting soul, deeply trusting yourself, communing with the wild, communing with spirits, with ancestors. And you can trust all of that. Trust yourself, trust your own power and magic to be expressed the more that you allow yourself to be held by Mama Earth. And this is, again, my deep work. It's the deep work of the witch. It's something that is going to bring up, ironically, magically, paradoxically, the approval shadow. But it's so important. So plug yourself back into the earth, top up your vital force, go out into the moon and bathe in her cyclical power. This is crucial as a witch. It's crucial. It's needed for you to function. And as you reconnect yourself with your natural habitat, you will begin to feel stronger, better. Your nervous system will be rejuvenated, will be calm. You'll be loving yourself more. And from there, you can do the deep work to be able to then love all the fearful parts of you, all the fearful kind of approval seeking of the modern world. And yeah, you can love yourself into liberation. So I'm going to leave it there and leave you with all the love. And yeah, just a reminder that, yeah, all is so, so welcome here. You are welcome in this space. And yeah, that's the other invitation, is like, if you haven't joined the Secret Witch Circle, then join us in the Facebook group. Even if you're not on Facebook, it is worth joining us for specifically for that purpose, because this is the safe space that enables you to really express yourself in a way that you're not going to be disapproved of. Like, all of you is welcome in that space. So if this is you and you're feeling like, I don't know how to begin to approve of myself, I don't know how to begin to love myself, I don't know how to be my witch in a world that doesn't understand me, that doesn't approve of me, join us. Be loved, be held by your sisters, begin to witness there are more of us than we think. There are other women who feel that kind of, that expression of witch, and it's not as rare as we think. So leaving you with all the love, and I will catch you soon. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.